a woman suddenly broke into the house of a millionaire and his 2 children. The next day, the helpless millionaire had to appear in court because the Grant mansion was buzzing with energy as the final touches for Harry's birthday party were being set up. Bright balloons and streamers lined the once formal hallways, turning them into a child's dreamland. Michael, usually seen in a sharp suit, had opted for a casual sweater as he oversaw the preparations, feeling a mix of excitement and nerves. "Dad, check out the cake!" Harry's excited voice echoed through the room as he rushed in, his eyes wide with amazement at the 3-layer superhero cake. Michael lifted him up, marveling at how much his son had grown in just a year. "It's incredible, buddy," he said with a smile. "Just like you." Sarah walked in, carrying a giggling toddler on her hip. "Everything looks amazing, Michael. You really went all out this time." Michael looked around at his family, a warmth spreading through him that still felt new. This joy, this feeling of being part of something bigger, was something he never thought he'd experience. The path from being a cold-hearted businessman to becoming a devoted dad hadn't been easy, but moments like these made it all worth it. The doorbell rang, signaling the arrival of the first guests. Soon, the house was filled with the lively sounds of kids playing and parents chatting. Michael found himself in conversation with the other dads, talking about Little League and school projects, things that would have bored him a year ago, but now sparked a genuine interest. As the party hit its peak, Michael stepped back to watch Harry laughing with his friends, his face glowing with happiness. Sarah came up beside him, slipping her hand into his. "Are you happy?" she asked, her eyes sparkling. Michael nodded, at a loss for words to describe how content he felt. Just as he opened his mouth to answer, a disturbance at the front door caught his attention. "Sir, you can't just storm in here." The security guard's voice sounded tense and uneasy. Michael's body stiffened, his business instincts kicking in. He quickly moved toward the commotion, Sarah close behind. At the door stood a disheveled couple, their wild eyes scanning the room until the woman's gaze locked onto something behind Michael. Her face collapsed, a broken sob escaping from her throat. "Hi, Harry," she murmured, her voice trembling. Michael spun around to find Harry standing frozen at the doorway, his eyes wide with shock and recognition. "And Mommy." Harry's soft voice barely made a sound, but it hit Michael like a punch. The woman rushed forward, dropping to her knees in front of Harry. "Oh, my baby, my sweet boy." Michael stood there stunned, his mind spinning. This didn't make sense. The background checks, the investigations, everything had pointed to the fact that Harry and Andy's mother had passed away. Sarah, always the investigator, was the first to regain her composure. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step back. We need to confirm your identity and—" "Confirm," the man standing beside the woman barked. "That's our son you kidnapped, our little boy." The commotion caught the attention of the other guests. The room filled with whispers and confused glances as parents instinctively pulled their kids closer, sensing the tension in the air. Michael finally managed to find his voice, stepping between Harry and the couple. "I think it's best if we have this conversation somewhere private. Sarah, could you?" Sarah gave a quick nod, understanding the situation. She gently steered Harry back toward the party room, offering him soft words of comfort as the boy visibly trembled. As Michael led the couple to his study, his thoughts raced. How could this be real? What would this mean for his family, for the life they had created together? The woman's eyes never left Harry, filled with a desperate longing that twisted Michael's heart. Once they reached the study, Michael turned to face them. "I think you need to explain yourselves. Who are you, and where have you been for the last year?" The woman pulled her eyes away from the direction Harry had gone, locking her gaze onto Michael, with a mixture of pain and determination. "My name is Susan Whitmore, That little boy is my son, and I've come to bring him home." Her words hung in the air, thick with weight. Michael felt the ground shifting beneath him. Everything he thought he knew about his family, the life he had worked so hard to build, suddenly felt like it was crumbling apart. "If you really are who you claim to be," Michael said, doing his best to keep his voice calm, "then you know that Harry and Andy have been through unimaginable trauma. They finally found peace and love here. You can't just come in and—" "Love," the man interrupted, his voice dripping with bitterness. "You stole our children. You have no right." Susan gently placed her hand on the man's arm, her gaze locked on Michael. "Mr. Grant, I know this is overwhelming, but you need to understand. I didn't abandon my children. I was taken against my will. It took me all this time to escape and find them." Michael's mind raced, flooded with questions, doubts and fears. But underneath all of it, a sense of dread began to take root. As he looked into Susan's eyes, he could see the same fierce love and determination he felt for Harry and Andy. His heart sank as he realized that the battle for his kids had only just begun. Right on cue, a small voice broke the tension from the doorway. "Daddy, what's happening?" All eyes turned to see Harry standing there, the enormous oak door dwarfing his small frame. His wide eyes darted between Michael and the woman claiming to be his mother. In that instant, Michael understood that whatever happened next would change all their lives forever. The peaceful family life he had worked so hard to build was now hanging by a thread. Looking at Harry's confused and scared face, Michael made a silent promise. No matter the cost, no matter what he had to do, he would protect his son with everything he had. "It's okay, buddy," Michael said, forcing a reassuring smile. "Everything's going to be all right." But even as the words left his mouth, he knew deep down that nothing would ever be the same again. The storm he had been dreading had finally arrived, and it was threatening to tear apart everything he held dear. The following weeks passed in a whirlwind of legal battles, court hearings, and sleepless nights. Michael found himself in a fight he never imagined, battling for the children he had grown to love as his own. The once peaceful halls of the Grant mansion were now filled with tense phone calls and hushed discussions. Susan Whitmore, armed with DNA proof and a tragic story of kidnapping and escape, was waging a full-scale legal war to get custody of Harry and Andy back. Her tale, full of chilling details of captivity and a daring escape, had captured the media's attention. Almost overnight, Michael went from being seen as a hero to being portrayed as a potential kidnapper. "Mr. Grant, how do you respond to the accusations that you knew the children's mother was alive?" a reporter called out, as Michael hurried out of the courthouse, shielding Harry from the barrage of flashing cameras. "No comment," Michael muttered, guiding the boy into the car where Sarah sat beside Andy. The moment they were all inside, Harry's small voice cut through the thick silence. "Dad, are they going to take us away?" Michael's chest tightened. Turning to Harry, Michael took the boy's little hands in his own. "Harry, listen to me. I will do everything I can to keep us together. You and Andy mean everything to me, and that will never change." Sarah reached out, giving Michael's shoulder a comforting squeeze. Though silent, the worry in her eyes mirrored the same fear that had kept Michael awake night after night. At the offices of Steinberg Associates, Michael paced anxiously while Rachel Steinberg, his lawyer, laid out their options. "Michael, I have to be straight with you," Rachel began. "Susan Whitmore's case is strong. She is their biological mother, and her abduction story is compelling. The fact that you didn't know about her when you took the kids in works in our favor," Rachel continued. "But—" Michael interrupted, his patience running thin. "But what?" Rachel sighed. "Courts usually side with biological parents in these situations. We have to prove that moving the boys would harm them. Michael ran his hand through his hair, frustration evident. They've been through enough already. Harry's just now starting to trust people again, and Andy, he's just a baby. They need this stability. I know, Michael. I'm going to fight for you with everything I have, Rachel assured him. But you have to be ready for the possibility that... No, Michael interrupted, his voice firm. I won't even consider losing them. They're my children, mine. As he spoke, Michael realized just how much his life had changed. The idea of losing Harry and Andy terrified him more than any failed business deal or financial setback he had ever faced. Across town, Sarah was facing her own internal battle. As a detective, she had a duty to fully investigate Susan's claims. But as someone who had grown to love Harry and Andy, every new piece of evidence in Susan's favor felt like a dagger to her heart. Detective Reeves, we've verified parts of Mrs. Whitmore's story, her partner, Detective Johnson, said. The location she described matches an abandoned property connected to Daniel Whitmore. Sarah nodded, her face a mask of professionalism, even as her stomach churned. And the timeline? She asked. It lines up. Hospital records show she was treated on the date she claims she escaped. The injuries are consistent with someone who endured long-term captivity. Each word hit like a hammer on the fragile foundation Sarah had built with Michael and the kids. She closed her eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath to steady herself. When she opened them, her gaze drifted to a framed picture on the desk, a candid shot of her Michael and Andy laughing together at the park. What do we do now? Johnson's voice softened as he noticed her unease. Sarah straightened, forcing herself to push down the flood of emotions with every ounce of willpower she had left. We follow the evidence, wherever it takes us, she replied firmly. That's our job. But as she turned her focus back to the case files, she couldn't shake the feeling that with every detail she confirmed, every part of Susan's story she verified, she was somehow betraying her own family. The legal fight was spilling over into every corner of the Grant family's life. Harry, once so lively and social, had become withdrawn. The nightmares he used to have came back full force. Andy, too little to understand what was going on, could still sense the tension in the air, becoming fussy and clingy. One evening, as Michael tucked Harry into bed, his son's trembling voice shattered his heart. Dad, do I have to go with her? I don't want to leave you, Mom and Andy. Michael sat on the edge of the bed, pulling Harry into a tight hug. Oh, buddy, he said softly. I wish I could promise you that nothing would change. But what I can promise you, no matter what, no matter where you are, is that I will always love you. You and Andy are my boys, in every way that matters. As Harry clung to him, his tears soaking into Michael's shirt, a deep sense of determination swelled within him. He would stop at nothing to keep his family together. The Michael Grant of the past, the ruthless businessman who never let anything stand in his way, reawakened. But this time that drive wasn't about power or money. It was about love. What Michael didn't realize, as he comforted Harry that night, was that forces were already moving against him. Forces that would test everything. His resolve, his relationships, and his understanding of family. The fight for Harry and Andy was about to take a dark turn, one that would uncover hidden secrets and push everyone involved to face painful truths about themselves and those they cared for. As Michael left Harry's room, gently closing the door behind him, he had no idea that a storm was brewing on the horizon, one that would challenge everything he thought he knew about being a father, a protector, and a man. As the legal fight over Harry and Andy grew more intense, Michael found himself digging deeper into Susan Whitmore's past, desperate to uncover anything that might help him keep his family intact. Late one night, while sifting through documents in his home office, he uncovered something that shook him to his core: a file. Hidden within the records of Grant Enterprises, it held details about a project Michael had managed years ago, a project he now realized, with mounting dread, had directly affected the Whitmore family. His hands shook as he flipped through the pages of a business deal that had seemed insignificant back then. Grant Enterprises had bought out a small tech firm, dismantling it for its patents and laying off all of its workers. One of those workers was Daniel Whitmore. The realization hit Michael hard. His choices, driven by an unwavering focus on profit, had set off the chain of events that ultimately led to the Whitmore family's downfall. Daniel's slide into crime, the dangers that forced Susan to run with her kids. It all traced back to that one ruthless decision. The weight of his indirect responsibility pressed down on him, making him feel sick. Michael had always prided himself on his sharp business instincts, on making tough calls without getting emotional. But now, staring at a picture of Harry and Andy on his desk, he realized the true cost of that approach. The next morning, Michael walked into the kitchen, dark circles under his eyes from a sleepless night. Sarah, already making breakfast for the boys, glanced at him and knew something was off. "Michael, what's wrong?" she asked, her voice filled with worry. He slumped into a chair, running a hand through his messy hair. "I found something, Sarah. Something about my connection to the Whitmores. It's bad." As he shared his discovery, Sarah's face shifted from concern to shock, and finally to a somber understanding. "Oh, Michael," she whispered, reaching out to hold his hand. "I'm responsible for this," Michael admitted, his voice shaking. "Everything that's happened to Harry, to Andy and Susan. It all started because of what I did. I wrecked their family before I even knew they existed." Sarah squeezed his hand, her detective instincts already running through the legal implications. "This complicates things in court," she began, but Michael cut her off. "I know. It could ruin our case. But Sarah, how can I keep fighting for them when I'm the reason they were ever in harm's way?" Before she could answer, they heard the soft sound of Harry's footsteps approaching. The boy paused in the doorway, his sharp intuition picking up on the tension in the air. "Dad, Sarah, what's wrong?" Michael forced a smile and held out his arms. As Harry climbed into his lap, Michael hugged him tightly, taking in the familiar smell of his hair. How could he explain to this child, who had already faced so much, that the man he called Dad was part of the reason for his trauma? "Nothing's wrong, buddy," Michael lied, hating himself for it. "We were just talking about grown-up stuff. How about we grab some breakfast?" As they moved through their usual morning routine, Michael's thoughts were in chaos. The weight of his past involvement in the Whitmore tragedy was tearing him apart, making him face the man he used to be and the irreversible consequences of his actions. Later that day, Michael sat down with his lawyer, Rachel Steinberg, and told her everything he'd discovered. As he spoke, Rachel's expression grew more serious. "Michael, this is a huge problem," she said once he finished. "If Susan's legal team gets hold of this, they could argue that guilt is the only reason you took the boys in. It could destroy our custody case." Michael nodded, the reality of the situation pressing down on him. "I get it. But Rachel, I can't hide this. I can't live with myself if I keep something this big from them. It's too important, especially for Harry and Andy." Rachel leaned back in her chair, looking at him closely. "The Michael Grant I met at the beginning wouldn't have considered sharing anything that could hurt his position." Michael nodded again. "They changed me," he said, Thinking of the boys who had flipped his world upside down, Harry and Andy made me want to be better. And now, I have to live up to that, no matter what. As they continued discussing the potential fallout of his decision, Michael felt a mix of fear and relief. The truth, as hard as it was finally coming to light. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, Susan Whitmore was deep in conversation with her own lawyer, tempers flaring. The toll of the custody fight showed clearly on her face, her hands shaking slightly as she held onto her cup of coffee. "I just don't get it," she said, frustration cracking her voice. "Why is this taking so long? They're my kids. I'm their mother. How is this even a debate about where they belong?" Her lawyer, Vanessa Clark, a no-nonsense woman with sharp eyes, exhaled slowly. "Susan, I know this is hard, but we have to tread carefully," she paused. "Mr. Grant's provided a stable home for the kids for over a year now. The court is going to take that into account." Susan banged the cup down on the table, coffee spilling over the rim. A stable home? He's the one who put them in danger to begin with. If it weren't for his cutthroat business dealings, Daniel would still... Her voice faltered as tears gathered in her eyes. Vanessa leaned forward, her tone softening. "Susan, I know you've been through an awful lot, but right now, we need to keep our focus on what's best for Harry and Andy." Susan took a shaky breath and nodded. "You're right. I'm sorry. It's just that every single day they're away is another day they're calling him Dad. Another day I'm missing out on being with my children." As Susan tried to steady herself, Vanessa's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and raised an eyebrow. "Well, this is interesting," she said slowly. "It seems Mr. Grant has some new information he's ready to share. Something about a past connection to your family." Susan's eyes shot up, narrowing. "What kind of connection?" she asked sharply. As Vanessa laid out the basics of what Michael had revealed, Susan's heart raced between feelings of relief and anger. Finally, the truth about Michael Grant's involvement in her family's downfall was surfacing. But even as she listened, a small voice inside her wondered what kind of man willingly reveals details that could potentially hurt his own legal standing. The Michael Grant she had built up in her mind, the cold, calculated businessman who had caused so much pain, didn't seem to match this new reality. For the first time since the custody fight began, Susan felt a flicker of doubt. Had she been wrong about the man who had taken her children in? And if she was, what did that mean for the future she had imagined, being reunited with Harry and Andy? As both Michael and Susan processed these developments, neither of them realized just how much darker the struggle over their children could become. Years of hidden forces were finally coming together, unraveling secrets that would challenge both families and redefine their understanding of love, forgiveness, and what it truly means to be a parent. The moment was set for a confrontation that would leave no one untouched, pushing them to face hard truths from their past and make life-changing decisions about their future. At the heart of it all were two innocent children, unaware of the chaos around them, craving the love and stability they had long been denied. As the custody fight heated up, its impact became most noticeable in Harry's behavior. The once lively and outgoing child had withdrawn into himself, his bright smiles fading and his nightmares becoming more frequent. Michael and Sarah stood by helplessly, watching the boy they cherished struggle with the uncertainty clouding his future. One tough evening, Michael found Harry curled up in a corner of his room, clutching a tattered stuffed animal. His eyes were swollen from crying, and he flinched when Michael approached. "Hey, buddy," Michael said softly, crouching down to meet Harry's gaze. "Want to talk about it?" Harry shook his head and buried his face in the stuffed toy. Michael's heart broke seeing him like that. He sat down next to Harry without touching him, giving the boy the space he needed. "You know," Michael began gently, "when I was your age, I had a stuffed elephant named Trunky. Whenever I was scared or sad, I'd hold on to him tight, just like you're doing right now." Harry peeked out from behind his toy, his curiosity breaking through his sadness for a moment. "You did?" Michael nodded, smiling softly. "I sure did. And you know what? It's okay to be scared sometimes. It's okay to feel sad, or even angry. What you're going through is tough for anyone, especially someone as brave as you." Slowly, Harry loosened up from his tight ball, leaning slightly toward Michael. "I don't feel brave," he whispered. "But you are," Michael reassured him. "You're one of the bravest people I know. And it's okay to feel all these big emotions about everything that's happening." Harry sat quietly for a moment, his little fingers running over the soft fur of his stuffed toy. Then, in a voice so faint that Michael had to lean in to catch it, he asked, "If I have to go with her, will you stop loving me?" The words hit Michael like a punch to the chest. He blinked back tears as he gently pulled Harry close. "Never," he said firmly. "Listen to me, no matter what happens, no matter where you are, I will always love you." He tapped his chest right over his heart. "You're my son in here, and nothing can ever change that." Harry held on to Michael tightly, his small body shaking with sobs. Michael hugged him even closer, whispering soothing words and letting his own tears fall quietly. They stayed like that for a long time, father and son, holding on to each other through their shared fear and love. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the house, Sarah was dealing with her own worries. Andy, too young to grasp the complexity of what was happening, could still feel the tension hanging in the air. The toddler had become extra clingy, his usual cheerful babbling now replaced with frequent tears. As Sarah tried to comfort him, she couldn't help but think about how much these boys had come to mean to her. She had always been so career-driven, never picturing herself as a mother. But now, the idea of losing Harry and Andy was unbearable. "It's okay, sweetie," she whispered, gently bouncing Andy in her arms. "Everything's going to be all right." But even as she said it, a wave of doubt washed over her. As a detective, she was trained to rely on facts, and the facts, especially with Michael's recent confession about his connection to the Whitmores, weren't looking good. Later that night, after both boys were finally asleep, Michael and Sarah sat together in the kitchen, the weight of everything they were facing hanging between them. "How's Harry?" Sarah asked, her voice full of concern. Michael sighed and ran his hand through his hair. He's scared, confused. He asked me if I'd stop loving him if he had to go with Susan. Sarah reached for Michael's hand across the table. "Oh, Michael. What did you say?" Michael's voice was thick with emotion as he replied, "I told him the truth, that I love him no matter what, that he'll always be my son." He tightened his grip on Sarah's hand. "But Sarah, the thought of losing them, I don't know if I can handle it." Sarah nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "I know. I feel the same way. These boys, they've become everything to us." They sat in silence for a while, both deep in thought. Eventually, Sarah broke the silence, her detective instincts cutting through the emotional haze. "Michael, we have to think about every possible outcome. If the court sides with Susan, we need a plan in place, for the boy's sake." Michael's jaw tightened, the determined businessman in him surfacing. "I'm not backing down without a fight, Sarah. I just can't." "I'm not saying we should give up," Sarah replied, her voice calm but firm. "But if Harry and Andy end up going with Susan, we need to make sure it's as smooth as possible. Their well-being has to come first, even if it breaks our hearts." Michael slowly nodded, Sarah's words sinking in. It was one of the things he admired most about her, her ability to stay clear-headed, even in tough situations. "You're right," he admitted. "As much as I want to keep them with us, we need to think about what's best for them." "But Sarah, how do we know if taking them away from the only stable home they've had is really in their best interest?" Sarah gently squeezed his hand, her eyes filled with both love and determination. "We keep fighting, Michael. We present our case and show the court how much the boys have thrived with us, but we also have to accept the possibility that Susan could be what they need. It won't be easy, but we owe it to Harry and Andy to prioritize their needs over our own wants." As they talked through their options, planning for every possible outcome, neither Michael nor Sarah realized there were bigger forces at play in their custody battle. Old secrets, set in motion years ago, were beginning to surface. Secrets that would shake both families to the core. Meanwhile, across town in a modest apartment, Susan Whitmore sat at her kitchen table, staring at a pile of documents. Her hands trembled slightly as she read through the information her lawyer had given her about Michael Grant's connection to her family's past. Discovering Michael's indirect role in her family's downfall had originally stoked her anger and fueled her determination to get her kids back. But as she dug deeper into the paperwork, a more complicated story began to unfold. Reports about Michael's changes since taking in Harry and Andy, accounts of the loving and stable home he had created, and shockingly, his voluntary sharing of information that could damage his own case. For the first time since this custody fight started, Susan felt a spark of uncertainty. The Michael Grant described in those reports didn't match the cold, calculating businessman she had envisioned. Could she have misjudged the man who had taken in her kids? As Susan wrestled with these conflicting feelings, she had no idea that her own past held secrets still hidden in the shadows. Secrets that would soon surface, forcing everyone involved to face painful realities and make unthinkable decisions. The custody battle for Harry and Andy was on the verge of an unexpected twist, one that would push the boundaries of love, forgiveness, and what family really means. At the heart of it all were two innocent children, oblivious to the chaos around them, craving the love and stability that had been missing from their lives for so long. As the custody fight heated up, a disturbing element started to creep in, casting a dark cloud over the entire case. Michael, driven by a combination of fatherly love and his investigative instinct, found himself digging deeper into the events surrounding Daniel Whitmore's death and Susan's puzzling return. Late one night, as Michael pored over documents in his office, a knock on the door interrupted him. Sarah walked in, her face full of worry. "Michael, we need to talk," she said, her voice low and serious. "I've found something about Susan's story that doesn't add up." Michael straightened in his chair, exhaustion forgotten. "What is it?" Sarah spread out some reports across the desk. "I've been going over the evidence from Susan's supposed captivity. There are inconsistencies in her timeline, gaps in her medical records, and then there's this." She pointed to a blurry surveillance photo. Michael squinted at it, trying to make out the figure. "Is that Susan?" Sarah nodded, her expression grim. "Taken 6 months ago, in a city far from where she claimed to be held captive. Michael, I think she's hiding something." As they examined the evidence, a troubling idea began to form. What if Susan's return wasn't as simple as it seemed? What if something more sinister was going on? Meanwhile, across town, Susan Whitmore sat in a darkened room, her hands trembling as she dialed a number she had sworn never to use again. "It's me," she whispered into the phone. "We've got a problem. Grant is digging too deep. He's close to uncovering the truth about Daniel." The voice on the phone was ice cold, methodical. "Then We'll need to speed things up. Don't forget, Susan, what's on the line here? If Grant uncovers the truth, you'll lose everything, especially those kids. Susan squeezed her eyes shut, trying to hold back tears. I know. I'll do whatever it takes, just promise me Harry and Andy won't be hurt. That's up to you, the voice said, right before the call ended. As Susan sat in the dark, the weight of her secret suffocating her, she couldn't help but wonder how things had spiraled so far out of control. The lies, the deceit, the desperate attempts to get her children back. It was all unraveling. Back at the Grant estate, Michael and Sarah stayed up through the night, piecing together clues from Susan's past. As dawn crept in, casting a soft glow through the study's windows, they leaned back in their chairs, shocked by what they'd uncovered. If this is right, Michael rasped, his throat raw from hours of talking. Susan isn't just fighting for custody. She's running from something, or someone, Sarah agreed, her detective instincts on overdrive. The question is, who and how does this tie into Daniel Whitmore's death? Before Michael could answer, a cry rang out from the baby monitor. Andy was up. As Michael started to rise, Sarah gently stopped him with a hand on his arm. I'll go. You need rest. We've got a long day ahead. After Sarah left to tend to Andy, Michael leaned back, thoughts racing. He'd entered this custody battle thinking it was just about a mother trying to get her kids back. But now, he realized they'd stumbled onto something much more dangerous and complicated. The next morning, while preparing for court, Michael couldn't shake the feeling they were overlooking something important. The puzzle pieces were there, but they weren't fitting together. Walking through the courthouse halls, he caught sight of Susan, huddled with her attorney. Their eyes locked for a split second, and Michael gasped at the terror in her face. It wasn't just the fear of losing her kids. It was something much deeper, more instinctive. As the session began, Michael found it hard to focus solely on the legal arguments. His mind kept drifting back to his questions about Susan. What was she really afraid of? And how far was she willing to go to protect her secrets? The judge's voice sliced through his thoughts. Mr. Grant, with the new evidence brought by Mrs. Whitmore's legal team, are you prepared to address the claims regarding your previous business dealings with Daniel Whitmore? Michael straightened his tie and stood. Yes, Your Honor. I'm ready to address those claims and provide context for my actions. As he laid out the tangled web of business decisions that had indirectly led to the downfall of the Whitmore family, Michael couldn't help but notice Susan's expression. She looked almost relieved, as though his confession was somehow working in her favor. It was at that moment Michael finally grasped the full scope of what was happening. This wasn't just a fight for custody anymore. This was about digging up the truth, a truth that could put everyone involved, especially Harry and Andy, in serious danger. As the courtroom adjourned for the day, Michael pulled Sarah aside. We've got to look deeper, he said in a low, urgent tone. Something bigger is going on here, and it's not just about Susan and Daniel. I'm starting to think the kids might actually be in danger, he added. Sarah gave a firm nod, her expression set. I'll make some calls. See if we can get into those sealed records from Daniel's history. Whatever's happening, we'll figure it out, she assured him. As they stepped out of the courthouse, neither Michael nor Sarah noticed the black sedan parked across the street. The car's tinted windows hid a pair of watchful eyes, silently observing their every move. The game had just been taken to a new level, and the real battle was only beginning. That night, while Michael was putting Harry to bed, the boy broke the silence with a nervous question. Dad, are the bad guys coming back? Michael's pulse quickened as he frozen. What bad guys, Harry? What are you talking about? Harry's eyes widened with fear. The ones Mom was scared of. She said we were running away from them. In that instant, Michael understood. The key to unraveling this mystery might lie with the very children he was trying so hard to protect. As he hugged Harry tight, calming his fears, Michael's mind was already racing with ideas for a new strategy. They had to uncover the truth, not just to win the custody battle, but to ensure Harry and Andy's safety. Whatever secret Susan had been hiding, whatever dangers were buried in the Whitmore family's past, Michael was ready to expose it all. As he quietly shut Harry's door behind him, Michael's resolve solidified. He would stop at nothing to keep his family safe, no matter what it took. This fight wasn't just in the courtroom anymore. It was against the unseen threats lurking in the background. What Michael didn't know was that the hardest test of his love and strength was still ahead. Michael and Sarah's investigation into Susan Whitmore's past and the suspicious circumstances of Daniel's death took on a new urgency in the days that followed. They pushed forward relentlessly, using Sarah's ties in law enforcement and Michael's connections in the business world to unravel the mystery. One night, as they were surrounded by piles of documents and computer printouts, Sarah's phone buzzed with a new message. Her expression shifted as she read it. "Michael, we've got something," she said, her voice a mix of excitement and unease. "My FBI contact just sent over some sealed files." "You're not going to believe this," she added, as Michael leaned closer, his pulse quickening. Sarah opened the files on her laptop, and what they discovered left them both in shock. The documents laid out a tangled network of criminal operations linked to Daniel Whitmore, reaching far beyond what they had expected. There were shell companies, offshore accounts, and most shockingly, connections to a notorious crime syndicate that had been dodging law enforcement for years. "This is way bigger than we thought," Michael muttered, running a hand through his hair. "But where does Susan fit in all this?" As if answering his question, Sarah pulled up another file. It was a police report from just weeks before Susan was supposedly kidnapped. It described a violent argument between Daniel and an unknown person, with Susan listed as a witness. "Check this out," Sarah pointed to part of the report. "What Susan told us about her relationship with Daniel doesn't match this. She had said they were happily married, but this report suggested she was trying to escape him." Michael's mind raced, piecing it together. What if Susan wasn't kidnapped at all, he wondered. What if she ran, taking the kids to shield them from Daniel's criminal dealings? Sarah nodded, her detective instincts kicking in. That would explain the holes in her story. But if that's the case, why return now? And why lie? A gentle knock at the door ended their conversation. They turned to find Harry standing there, gripping his stuffed animal, his eyes wide with fear. "Dad." "Sarah." "I had a nightmare," Harry whispered softly. Without hesitation, Michael moved toward him, lifting the boy into his arms. "It's all right, buddy. You're safe now. Do you want to talk about it?" But Harry just pressed his face against Michael's shoulder, his small body shaking. "I dreamed about the bad guys again. The ones Mom was afraid of." Michael exchanged a serious glance with Sarah over Harry's head. This wasn't the first time Harry had mentioned these bad guys when talking about his past. Sarah kneeled down to Harry's eye level and spoke softly. "Can you tell us more about them, Harry? It's okay if you don't want to, but it might help us figure things out." Harry looked between them, fear and doubt clear in his young eyes. After a moment of hesitation, he began speaking in a quiet voice. "They were Mum's friends, but she didn't like them. They made her do things she didn't want to do. That's why we had to run." As he continued, describing a life constantly on the run and filled with fear, Michael felt both heartache for what the kids had gone through and a rising urgency. Whatever Susan had been involved in, it was obvious now that Harry and Andy were in more danger than they'd previously thought. After settling Harry back into bed, Michael and Sarah gathered in the study, their faces tense. "We need to confront Susan," Michael said firmly, his voice steady but intense. "Whatever she's caught up in, we need to know everything if we're going to keep the kids safe." Sarah nodded, though her expression remained cautious. "We have to be smart, Michael. If she's tangled up with the same syndicate Daniel was, confronting her head-on could be dangerous. Not just for us, but for Harry and Andy too." Michael paced, frustration evident in his steps. "Then what do we do? We can't just sit around and wait for something bad to happen." After a brief silence, Sarah spoke again. "I have an idea, but you're not going to like it." Michael's eyes narrowed. "Who do you have in mind?" Sarah sighed deeply before answering. "Judge Winters." Michael's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "Winters? But he's retired, and after everything that went down with the corruption case?" "Exactly," Sarah cut in. "He's got the experience, the connections, and most importantly, he owes us. After we cleared his name in the corruption case, he told us that if we ever needed anything, he'd be there." Michael thought about that for a moment, weighing the risks against the rewards. After a brief pause, he nodded. "All right, reach out to him. But Sarah, we keep this under wraps. No one else can know what we're doing." The stakes were too high. As Sarah dialed Judge Winters, Michael stared out the window at the calm night outside. Somewhere out there, Susan Whitmore was hiding secrets that could shatter his family. And in the shadows lurked forces that posed a threat, not just to Harry and Andy's custody, but to their very lives. The next morning, as Michael prepared for another day in court, an unsettling feeling gnawed at him. It felt like they were on the brink of something much bigger. The custody fight that had consumed their lives for weeks now seemed like the beginning of a much larger, more dangerous situation. As he adjusted his tie and gave himself one last look in the mirror, Michael made a quiet promise. No matter what secrets were uncovered, no matter what dangers lay ahead, he would protect Harry and Andy. They were his sons in every way that counted, and he would do anything to keep them safe. Michael had no idea that the real test of his determination was just around the corner. The web of lies and threats surrounding the Whitmore family was tightening around them, forcing Michael to confront not just Susan and her hidden truths, but his own past and how far he was willing to go for his family. As he left the house, kissing Harry and Andy goodbye and exchanging a look with Sarah, Michael braced himself for the battles ahead. Whatever was coming, was ready to face it head-on. For his family, for his kids, he would stop at nothing. The game had changed. The stakes were higher than ever, but Michael Grant had faced high-stakes challenges before. This time, though, it wasn't just his career or reputation at risk. It was the lives and futures of two innocent children who had become his entire world. The Grant mansion, once a place of joy and family, now buzzed with tension. As Michael and Sarah dug deeper into the mystery surrounding Susan Whitmore and the looming threats, the stress started affecting every part of their lives. Harry, always more aware than his age suggested, pulled further away. His nightmares, which had started to fade, came back, stronger than ever. Michael had found himself more than once rushing into Harry's room in the dead of night, wrapping the boy in his arms as he cried about the bad people, whispering fears of being taken away. One especially tough morning, while Michael was trying to get Harry to eat breakfast, the boy suddenly broke down in tears. "I don't want to go to school," Harry sobbed, shoving his plate aside. "What if they come for me? What if you're not there?" Michael's chest tightened. Kneeling beside Harry, he gently turned him to look into his eyes. "Harry, listen to me. No one's going to take you. I promise you, you're safe here with us." But Harry's lip quivered. "But what about Mom? Is she coming back?" Does she not want us anymore? The question hung heavy in the air, loaded with the fear and confusion only a child could feel. Michael struggled for the right words, painfully aware of the fine line between truth and shielding Harry's heart. Your mum loves you so much, Harry. But sometimes things are hard for adults to figure out. Right now, the most important thing is that you and Andy are safe and loved. Can you trust me on that? Harry gave a small nod, but the worry still lingered in his eyes. As Michael pulled him in for a hug, he caught Sarah's eyes across the room. The worry and care in her expression mirrored exactly what he felt. Even little Andy, too young to grasp what was going on, seemed to sense the tension in the house. The normally bubbly toddler had become clingy, his joyful babbling now often replaced by crying fits. One afternoon, as Sarah tried to soothe the wailing Andy, her patience finally snapped. "I can't keep doing this, Michael," she burst out, her voice tight with frustration. "We're tearing these kids apart with all this uncertainty." Michael, who had been on the phone with their lawyer, quickly ended the call. He crossed the room, gently lifting Andy from Sarah's arms. "I know, love. I know it's hard. But we're doing our best," he reassured her. Sarah ran her hand through her hair, tears glistening in her eyes. "Are we?" she asked quietly. "Sometimes, I wonder if we're just being selfish. Maybe Susan is what these boys really need." The words lingered between them, echoing the unspoken fears they had both been carrying. Michael felt a flicker of anger, but quickly swallowed it. He knew Sarah was only saying what they both had been dreading. "Sarah, look at me," he said, balancing Andy in one arm while reaching out to her with the other. "We've been the family for these boys. We've given them stability, love, and a home. No matter what Susan's reasons are for showing up again, we can't just hand them over without knowing for sure it's the right thing for them." Sarah nodded, leaning into his touch. "I know. I'm sorry. I just feel like we're in a fight we can't win, and the boys are stuck in the middle of it." As if on cue, Harry's small, scared voice came from the next room. "Dad, Sarah, where are you?" They exchanged worried glances before Michael called back. "We're here, buddy. Come on in." Harry appeared in the doorway, clutching his stuffed animal tightly to his chest. His eyes shifted nervously between Michael and Sarah, picking up on the tension in the room. "Are you guys fighting?" he asked in a small, worried voice. "No, honey," Sarah said quickly, moving toward him. "We're just talking about grown-up things. Everything's fine." But Harry wasn't easily reassured. His lower lip trembled as he asked, "Is it because of me and Andy? Are we making things hard for you?" The innocence and guilt in his question broke their hearts. Michael immediately walked over, Andy still in his arms, forming a family huddle around Harry. "Listen to me, Harry," Michael said seriously. "None of this is your fault, or Andy's. We love you both more than anything. You two are the best things that have ever happened to us." Sarah nodded, wiping away a tear. "That's right. We're a family, and family sticks together no matter what." As they held the boys close, Michael and Sarah exchanged a glance over their heads. In that silent moment, they reaffirmed their commitment to each other and to Harry and Andy, determined to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Later that night, when the boys were finally asleep, Michael and Sarah sat at the kitchen table, their mugs of tea forgotten and growing cold. "We need to put an end to this," Michael said, breaking the silence. "For the boys' sake. This in-between state we're living in, it's not fair to them." Sarah nodded, her mind already racing with possibilities. "We need to confront Susan. Get the truth once and for all." Michael's jaw tightened. "And if she's involved in something dangerous, if bringing all this to light puts the boys in harm's way, then we'll face it. Sarah said firmly. Together. Whatever's going on, Michael, we can't keep living like this. Harry and Andy deserve better. As they talked through the next steps, making plans and preparing for whatever might come, neither of them realized that the wheels had already been set in motion. On the other side of town, in a dimly lit room, Susan Whitmore sat across from a group of figures, their faces hidden in shadow. Her expression was pale but resolute. "It's time," one of the figures said, his tone sharp and commanding. "Deliver what we want, or your kids will pay the price." Though Susan's hands shook, her voice remained calm as she answered, "I understand. I'll do whatever it takes." As the night wore on, the pieces of a dangerous and intricate game began to fall into place. The fight for Harry and Andy was about to hit its peak, and the ultimate test of love, loyalty, and family was still ahead. When the Grant Mansion lights went out for the night, Michael and Sarah were weighed down with worry, but firmly united in their mission. No matter what obstacles awaited them, they would face it together as a family. For Harry and Andy, they were prepared to go to any lengths. What they didn't realize was that the looming storm was about to hit, bringing with it revelations that would turn their world upside down. The day of reckoning dawned with an unsettling quiet. Michael woke up early, his mind already racing with thoughts of the confrontation ahead. Heading downstairs, he found Sarah in the kitchen, sipping coffee, her face set with determination. "Are you ready for this?" she asked quietly, not wanting to wake the kids. Michael poured himself a cup and nodded. "As ready as I'll ever be." "Judge Winters confirmed he'll meet us at the cafe," Sarah asked. "Yes, he'll be there," Michael replied. "Are you sure about this? Once we confront Susan, there's no turning back," Sarah warned. Michael's jaw clenched. "We don't have a choice, Sarah. For Harry and Andy, we need to get to the bottom of this." As they got ready to leave, Michael paused at the children's rooms. Harry was still sound asleep, his face peaceful for a change. In his crib, Andy cooed contentedly, completely unaware of the chaos unfolding around him. A wave of protectiveness surged through Michael, so strong it almost overwhelmed him. "I'll protect you," he whispered, "no matter what." The cafe buzzed with morning customers when Michael and Sarah arrived. They spotted Judge Winters seated in a corner booth, his expression somber as they approached. "Michael, Sarah," he greeted them. "I hope you realize the weight of what you're about to do." Michael slid into the booth. "We do, Your Honor. But we need answers, and Susan's the only one who can give them to us." As they laid out their plan, none of them noticed the woman who had just walked into the cafe, her eyes sweeping the crowd until they rested on their table. Susan Whitmore took a deep breath, bracing herself for what was about to unfold. "Hello, Michael," she said, her voice slicing through their conversation. All three heads shot up, and Michael's eyes narrowed. "Susan," he said coolly, "I'm glad you showed up." Susan slid into the booth, her body rigid with tension. "You said it was about the kids. What's going on?" Michael leaned in, his tone sharp and intense. "We know, Susan, about Daniel, the criminal connections. What we don't know is why you've come back. What are you running from?" Susan's face went pale, her eyes flicking toward the exits. "You don't understand. It's not safe to talk here." Sarah's instincts as a detective kicked in. "Susan, we can protect you and the boys, but you have to be honest with us." For a second, it seemed like Susan might make a run for it, but then, with a shaky breath, she began to talk. The story that unfolded was one of fear, desperation, and a mother's love stretched to the breaking point. Daniel, it turned out, was deeply involved with a dangerous crime syndicate. When Susan realized just how far he was in, she tried to escape with the children. But the syndicate had other plans. "They threatened Harry and Andy," Susan said, her voice cracking. They told me they'd hurt them if I didn't go along with what they wanted. So I ran. I took the boys and vanished. Michael's mind raced, trying to put all the pieces together. But why come back now? Why put yourself in danger? Tears welled up in Susan's eyes because they found me. They said if I didn't return and find something Daniel hid for them, they'd kill the boys. The weight of her words hung heavy over the table. Judge Winters leaned in, his voice calm but firm. Susan, we can help, but you have to tell us everything. What are they after? Before Susan could respond, the cafe door slammed open. 3 men in dark suits stepped in, their eyes quickly landing on their group. Susan's face went white. We need to go, she whispered, panic rising in her voice. Michael's protective instincts kicked in. He stood, positioning himself between Susan and the men approaching them. Sarah, get Susan out of here. I'll deal with them. What happened next unfolded in a chaotic blur. As Sarah hurried Susan toward the rear exit, Michael suddenly found himself face to face with the men. The faint bulge under their jackets made it clear. They were armed. Mr. Grant, the leader said, his tone icy. I believe you have something that belongs to us. Michael's thoughts spun wildly. What could they possibly be after? Then it hit him. Harry and Andy. They must think Susan already got whatever they wanted. I have no idea what you're talking about, Michael replied, fighting to keep his voice even. But I'd advise you to leave, now. The man's eyes narrowed. You don't seem to grasp the situation, Mr. Grant. We're not going anywhere without what we came for. And if you don't cooperate, well, accidents happen. Even to children. The casual delivery of the threat sent a chill racing down Michael's spine. In that instant, he understood how serious the situation really was. This wasn't just about adoption anymore. It was a matter of life and death. As tensions escalated inside the cafe, Sarah and Susan were darting through back alleys. Susan's face was set, a mixture of fear and determination. We have to get to the kids, she urged. If they know I'm here, they might go after Harry and Andy. Sarah's heart raced as she grabbed her phone, quickly dialing the secure line set up at the mansion. Mrs. Winters, it's Sarah. Activate Protocol Alpha. Get the children into the safe room, now. As they dashed toward Sarah's car, the screech of tires cut through the air. A black SUV barreled around the corner, heading straight for them. Run, Sarah shouted, shoving Susan forward. Meanwhile, back at the cafe, Michael was locked in a tense standoff with the men. He knew he had to stall, buy more time for Sarah to get Susan out. Whatever you think is happening, Michael said, keeping his voice steady, despite his racing pulse. You're wrong. I'm just a man trying to give 2 kids a home. The leader's laugh was sharp and cold. A businessman, huh? Oh, Mr. Grant, you've wandered into something way over your head. But don't worry. You'll understand soon enough. As the tension in the cafe hit its peak, Michael's mind raced, searching for a way out. He thought of Harry and Andy, of the family he had built with Sarah. His mind flashed to Susan, running for her life to protect her kids. In that moment, Michael Grant made a choice that would change everything. All right, he said, his voice steady and resolute. Let's talk, but not here. Somewhere more private. The leader narrowed his eyes, trying to gauge if Michael was genuine. After a tense pause, he nodded. Fine, Mr. Grant. You lead the way, but one wrong move, and those kids you care so much about, they'll pay the price, he finished coldly. As Michael was led out of the cafe, he caught Judge Winters' gaze. The older man gave a nearly invisible nod, a silent understanding passing between them. Whatever came next, they were all in this together. The fight for Harry and Andy had just escalated. As Michael stepped into the unknown, He made a silent promise to do whatever it took to protect his family. The man who had once been driven only by wealth and power was gone. Now, he was just a father, ready to face whatever darkness came his way to keep his kids safe. But Michael had no idea that the hardest test of his love and courage was still ahead. The black SUV sped down the city streets, its tinted windows hiding the tense figures inside. Michael sat stiffly between two men in suits, his mind racing as he tried to come up with a plan. The leader, who had only introduced himself as Mr. Kane, sat in the front seat, his cold eyes occasionally catching Michael's in the rearview mirror. "Where are we going?" Michael asked, doing his best to keep his voice calm. Kane gave a thin, humorless smile. "Somewhere we can have a real chat, Mr. Grant. You've become quite the thorn in our side." As the city faded into industrial zones, Michael's unease grew. He thought of Sarah and Susan, praying they had made it to safety. Most of all, he thought of Harry and Andy, hoping Mrs. Winters had gotten them to the safe room in time. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, Sarah and Susan were in a chase of their own. The black SUV that had been following them was still right behind, darting dangerously through the traffic. "We can't let them follow us back to the kids," Sarah muttered through clenched teeth as she swerved sharply onto a side street. Susan clutched the dashboard, her face pale with fear. "What are we going to do?" "They won't stop until they get what they're after." Sarah's thoughts raced as her instincts as a detective kicked in. What exactly is going on with Susan? What crucial thing did Daniel hide? Susan paused, her internal struggle written all over her face. "At last," she whispered. "The ledger. Daniel kept detailed records of everything. The syndicate's operations, names, dates, amounts, all of it." Sarah's eyes widened as the reality hit her. That kind of intel could dismantle the entire organization. Susan gave a grim nod. "Now they think I either have it or know where it is." As they zoomed through the streets, Sarah made a snap decision. "We're heading to the police station. It's our best shot at staying safe." Meanwhile, Michael was being led into a rundown warehouse on the city's edge. The vast space was cluttered with rusting equipment and forgotten crates piled high. Kane gestured toward a lone chair in the middle of the room. "Have a seat, Mr. Grant," he said, his voice echoing in the emptiness. "Let's chat about the location of Susan Whitmore and the items she was supposed to recover for us." Michael's brain raced, trying to stall. "I don't know what you're talking about. All I care about is Harry and Andy's safety." Kane's gaze darkened. "Those kids? They're just pawns. Daniel Whitmore left behind something of immense value, and Susan knows where it is. You're going to help us find her." As Kane spoke, Michael's eyes swept across the warehouse, searching for any possible way out. Then, he spotted movement from the corner of his eye. High up on the catwalk, he recognized a familiar figure. Judge Winters had followed them, and he wasn't alone. Hope flickered in Michael's chest, though he kept his expression neutral. Michael needed to keep Kane talking to buy time for the rescue that seemed to be in motion. "Even if I knew where Susan was," he said, with a hint of resignation in his voice, "why would I help you? You threaten my family." Kane leaned in close, his breath hot on Michael's face. "Because, Mr. Grant, if you don't cooperate, those kids you care so much about will pay the price. We've got eyes everywhere. One word from me, and they vanish for good." Michael felt a chill run down his spine, but before he could reply, chaos erupted. The sound of shattering glass filled the air as figures in tactical gear burst through the upper windows. Shouts of "Police! Don't move!" reverberated through the warehouse. Amid the chaos, Michael spotted his chance. He lunged at Kane, knocking him down, and the two struggled for control of the gun that suddenly appeared in Kane's grip. They wrestled on the hard, cold floor, each man fighting to overpower the other. Then, the crack of a gunshot echoed, Michael felt a sharp, burning pain shoot through his side, but the surge of adrenaline kept him going. Just before the police arrived, Michael managed to knock the gun out of Kane's hand, and they took the criminal down. As Michael was helped to his feet, he saw Judge Winters hurrying toward him, concern clear in his expression. "Michael, are you okay?" Judge Winters asked. Michael gave a quick nod, his face tight with pain. "I live for the kids, Sarah," Michael murmured. Winters reassured him, "They're safe. Sarah got Susan to the station. They're under protection." Michael felt a moment of relief, but it was fleeting. As the adrenaline wore off, the weight of the situation hit him hard. The threat was still very real. As long as the syndicate believed Susan had Daniel's ledger, Harry and Andy were in danger. After the raid, Michael found himself in a hospital bed, his side wrapped in bandages, his mind racing with unresolved questions. Sarah burst into the room, her expression a mix of relief and worry. "Michael," she called, rushing over. "Thank God you're okay." They embraced gently, mindful of his injury. "The kids?" Michael asked anxiously. "They're safe," Sarah said, comforting him. "Mrs. Winters got them to the panic room in time. They're shaken, but unharmed." Michael closed his eyes, letting the relief wash over him for a moment. When he opened them, his face was set with determination. "We've got to end this, Sarah. Once and for all." Sarah nodded, her mind already racing through possibilities. "Susan's agreed to cooperate completely. She's going to help us track down Daniel's ledger." As they planned their next move, neither noticed the nurse standing outside, listening carefully to every word. As she walked away, she discreetly pulled out her phone and dialed. "It's me," she said in a low voice. "Grant made it, and I know exactly where to find the ledger." The stage was set for the final showdown. Michael, still recovering, but fueled by his fierce love for his family, was gearing up for the fight of his life. This battle over Harry and Andy had become something far bigger and far more dangerous than just a custody dispute. Michael, Sarah, and a small group of loyal officers approached cautiously, weapons drawn. "Stay focused," Michael murmured. "Susan's safety comes first. We get her out, no matter what." They swiftly breached the building, clearing floor after floor of empty office spaces. The only sounds were their careful footsteps and the occasional static from their radios. On the top floor, they finally heard muffled voices behind a large, sturdy oak door. Michael's pulse quickened as Sarah signaled the team to move in. The door was kicked open, and chaos broke loose. Gunfire erupted as Kane's men started shooting. Michael ducked for cover, his eyes scanning the room frantically for Susan. There, in the corner, he spotted her. Susan was hunched over a computer, her fingers flying over the keyboard. Even with bullets zipping by, she was laser-focused on her work. "Susan!" Michael shouted, dodging as a bullet shattered the wood near his head. "We've got to move!" Susan's eyes met his, a mix of fear and determination shining through. "I can't. Not yet. I'm almost done transferring the files." "This is our only shot to take them down." Suddenly, Michael realized Susan wasn't just a bystander. She was fighting back, using the very intel that had endangered her family to take down the crime syndicate. Renewed with purpose, Michael laid down cover fire while Sarah hurried over to Susan. "How much longer?" Sarah yelled over the gunshots. 30 seconds, Susan replied, her hands never slowing. Those 30 seconds felt endless. Michael's heart sank as Khan himself emerged from the shadows, his gun aimed straight at Susan. In an instant, Michael made a decision. He threw himself between Susan and Khan just as the gun went off. Searing pain tore through Michael's shoulder, but he stayed upright, now aiming his own weapon at Khan. "It's over," Michael growled, teeth clenched. "Drop the gun." Khan's eyes flicked between Michael and the computer Susan was still working on. Frustration twisted his face as he realized he had lost. Just as he began to lower his weapon, Susan shouted triumphantly, "It's done! I sent everything to the FBI!" For a brief moment, the room fell silent as the weight of her words hit. Then, in a final act of desperation, Khan lunged at Susan. Michael didn't flinch. His gun fired once, and Kane collapsed to the ground. As the gunshot's echoes faded, the room exploded with movement. Officers stormed in, securing the remaining gang members, while paramedics hurried to help the injured, including Michael. In the middle of the chaos, Michael found himself face to face with Susan. Her eyes held a mix of gratitude and something more profound. "You saved me," she whispered. "After everything? Why?" Michael winced as the paramedic worked on his shoulder. "Because it was the right thing to do, and because those boys need their mum." Tears filled Susan's eyes. "Michael, I've messed up so much. But seeing you with Harry and Andy, how much you care for them, I know now. They couldn't ask for a better father." Her words lingered between them, an unspoken acknowledgement of the bond Michael had built with the kids. As they were led outside, Sarah joined them, her face a mix of concern over Michael's injury, but with visible relief in her expression. "It's really over," she sighed, gripping Michael's uninjured hand. He nodded, the weight of the night's events finally settling in. They had taken down a major crime syndicate, saved Susan, and possibly dismantled a vast corruption ring. As the adrenaline wore off, Michael's thoughts shifted to Harry and Andy, anxiously waiting at home. He realized the hardest part was still ahead. How would they explain everything to the boys? How would they move forward as a family with all their complicated history? The drive back to the mansion was quiet, each of them lost in thought. They all knew that the coming days would bring difficult conversations and tough choices, but for now, there was a quiet sense of peace. They had survived, they had won, and most importantly, they had protected the children they loved. As the first light of dawn peeked over the horizon, Michael felt a flicker of hope for the future. Whatever challenges were ahead, they would face them together as a family. The battle was done, but the journey of healing and rebuilding had just begun. The weeks that followed the intense showdown with Kane's syndicate were full of emotions and activity. Michael, now wearing a sling, found himself not only recovering physically, but also navigating the fragile process of reshaping their family's future. The Grant Mansion, once a place filled with tension and uncertainty, was slowly becoming a space of healing and cautious optimism. Harry and Andy, initially confused by the sudden return of their mother, were gradually getting used to the idea of having both Susan and Michael in their lives again. One bright afternoon, Michael sat on the porch, watching as Susan played with the boys in the yard. The sound of their laughter, which had once been so rare, now echoed more often. Sarah came up beside him, offering him a cup of coffee. "How are you holding up?" she asked, her eyes studying his expression. Michael let out a heavy sigh, his emotions mixed. "It's complicated. Seeing Susan with the boys, it's clear how much they've missed her, but I can't shake the feeling. Like you're losing them," Sarah softly finished for him. He nodded, appreciating her insight. "I know it's selfish," he admitted. "Susan's their mum, and she's been through so much. But the idea of not being their father anymore..." Sarah reached over and squeezed his hand reassuringly. "Michael, you'll always be their father. The bond you've built with Harry and Andy isn't something that can just disappear. We'll find a way to make it work for everyone." Their conversation was cut short when Harry called out, "Dad, Sarah, come play with us." As they headed to join the fun in the yard, Michael couldn't help but notice the slight tension in Susan's posture when Harry referred to him as Dad. It was a stark reminder of the complicated feelings everyone was grappling with. Later that night, after the kids were asleep, Michael, Sarah, and Susan sat down for a much-needed talk. "We need to figure out what's next," Michael began, trying to keep his voice steady despite his nerves. "Susan, you're welcome to stay here as long as you need. The boys need their mom." Tears welled up in Susan's eyes as she nodded. "Thank you, Michael. I can't even put into words how thankful I am for everything you've done for the boys and for me. But I know I've caused so much pain and turmoil in your lives." Sarah leaned in, her instincts as a detective sharpening, ready to help navigate the delicate situation. "Susan, what are you trying to say?" Michael asked, his voice filled with confusion. Susan inhaled deeply, trying to steady herself before speaking. "I've been given the opportunity to testify against what's left of the syndicate. In return, the FBI will offer me protection in their witness program." Her words lingered in the air, heavy with the weight of what they meant. Michael felt like the ground had just shifted beneath him. "And what about the boys?" he managed to ask, his voice tense. Susan looked at him, her voice trembling. "That's why I needed to talk to both of you," she began. "I love Harry and Andy more than anything. But after all that's happened, I'm not sure I'm what's best for them right now." Michael and Sarah exchanged stunned looks. This wasn't what they had expected to hear. "Susan," Sarah said softly, "are you saying you want Michael to continue raising the boys?" Tears now streamed down Susan's face as she nodded. "I've seen how happy and safe they are with you two. The idea of moving them again, of risking their safety if the syndicate ever tracks us down, it terrifies me." A flood of mixed emotions surged through Michael. Relief, guilt, hope, sadness, all blending together. "Susan, are you absolutely certain about this?" "They're your children," he said gently. "They're your children too, Michael," she replied firmly. "In the past year, you've been more of a parent to them than I've been able to be. I'm not saying I want to vanish from their lives, but I believe the best thing for them right now is to stay here with you and Sarah." The conversation stretched into the night as they discussed the details, legal arrangements, logistics, and how to explain everything to Harry and Andy. By the time they headed to bed, a rough plan had taken shape. The coming months brought a period of change for everyone. Susan stayed at the mansion, making the most of her time with the boys, while also preparing for her departure. Meanwhile, Michael and Sarah worked with attorneys to finalize their legal guardianship, ensuring Susan could stay in touch once she entered witness protection. Explaining the situation to the boys was one of the hardest things Michael had ever done. There were tears, questions, and moments of confusion. But slowly, with love and patience, Harry and Andy started to grasp that this arrangement didn't mean losing anyone. It meant their family would grow in a unique way. As the day of Susan's departure approached, Michael found her in the garden, quietly watching the boys play. "Are you really sure about this?" he asked softly as he stood beside her. Susan faced him, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and determination. "I am," she said quietly. "It's hard, but I know this is what's best for them." She paused, her voice softening. "And Michael, thank you for loving them, for being the father they need." Michael didn't have the words to express all the emotions swirling inside him, so he simply nodded. They stood side by side, watching the kids they both loved, united in their commitment to giving Harry and Andy the best future possible. The day Susan left was difficult for everyone. There were long hugs, tears, and promises to stay in touch as much as her new life would allow. As her car pulled away, Michael held Harry and Andy close, Sarah standing beside them, offering silent support. "Is Mom really gone?" Harry's small voice broke through, laced with confusion. Michael knelt down, meeting both boys' eyes. "Your mom loves you so much," he said gently, "and she'll always be a part of our family." Sometimes love means making tough choices to protect the ones we care about. But remember, we're your family too, and we'll always be here for you, no matter what. As they walked back into the house together, Michael felt a calm settle over him. The journey ahead wouldn't be easy, but they would face it as a family. Maybe not in the conventional sense, but bound by a love that ran deeper than blood. What had started as a messy custody battle had grown into something none of them had anticipated. It had strengthened new connections, redefined what family meant, and most importantly, given Harry and Andy the love and stability they needed. That night, as Michael tucked the boys into bed, he realized that family wasn't just about biology or legal papers, but about love, sacrifice, and the choice to stand by each other through anything. With Sarah by his side and Harry and Andy's love in his heart, Michael knew they could face whatever challenges came their way, together as a family. Years later, the once quiet mansion that symbolized Michael's lone success was now filled with the joyful chaos of family life. On a sunny Saturday morning, Michael was in the kitchen flipping pancakes, while Harry, now a tall 11-year-old, set the table. Andy, at 7, perched on a stool, carefully pouring fresh orange juice into glasses. "Dad," Harry started, his face serious, "do you think Mom will be able to come to my soccer championship next month?" Michael hesitated for a moment, choosing his words carefully. Susan's visits were rare due to the witness protection program, but the boys always looked forward to them. "I'm not sure, buddy, but we'll ask when she calls next week. You know Sarah and I wouldn't miss it for anything." Harry nodded, understanding but a little disappointed. Michael's heart sank, aware of how much the boys missed their mom. Yet he was thankful for the close bond they had all built together. Right then, Sarah walked into the kitchen, her hair still messy from sleep. "Something smells good," she said, giving Michael a quick kiss before messing up Andy's hair. "Dad's making chocolate chip pancakes," Andy shouted excitedly, his eyes lighting up. Sarah chuckled, her laughter filling the kitchen. "Well, we better eat fast then. We've got a big day ahead. Remember?" The boys' faces lit up with excitement. Today was the day they had been eagerly waiting for. Their official adoption ceremony. Although Michael and Sarah had been raising Harry and Andy for years, this legal step felt huge. As they sat down for breakfast, Michael reflected on how far they had come. The custody battle that once seemed like it could tear them apart had only made their family stronger. No legal document could define the bond they shared. After eating, as they all dressed in their best clothes, Michael found himself adjusting his tie in front of the mirror, his hands shaking slightly. Sarah came up behind him, wrapping her arms around his waist. "Nervous?" she asked softly. Michael met her gaze in the mirror. "A little," he admitted. "We've been working toward this for so long. I just want everything to go perfectly for the boys." Sarah smiled, her eyes filled with love. "It's already perfect, Michael. We're a family where it counts, and today just makes it official." As they gathered in the foyer, ready to head to the courthouse, Michael's phone buzzed with a message. He froze as he read it. "Everything okay, Dad?" Harry asked, worry showing on his young face. Michael looked up, his face breaking into a wide smile. "Everything's wonderful," he replied. "That was a message from your mum. She set up a surprise video call for after the ceremony." The boys' faces lit up with happiness, and Michael felt a wave of appreciation wash over him. Despite all the challenges and the distance, Susan had always been there, a loving and constant part of their lives, supporting the unique family they had built together. Michael and Sarah appeared before the judge in the courtroom, with Harry and Andy standing in between them. As they made their promises to love and care for the boys as their legal parents. Michael experienced a sense of fulfillment he'd never felt before. "By the authority vested in me," the judge said, his voice filled with warmth, "I now declare Harry and Andy the legal children of Michael and Sarah Grant." "Congratulations to all of you." The room filled with applause and joyful tears. Michael knelt down, pulling the boys into a tight hug, tears of joy running down his face. Sarah joined, wrapping her arms around them all. "We love you so much," Michael whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You've made us a real family in every way that matters." As they walked out of the courthouse into the bright sunshine, Michael felt an overwhelming sense of peace. What had started as a chance meeting on a chilly evening had led to this moment of pure happiness and belonging. Back home, gathered around the computer for the video call with Susan, Michael watched as Harry and Andy excitedly shared every detail of the ceremony with their mom. Susan's face, glowing with pride and love, filled the screen. "I'm so happy for all of you," Susan said, her eyes glistening with tears. "Michael, Sarah, thank you for giving our boys the family they've always deserved." Michael squeezed Sarah's hand, the weight of Susan's words sinking in. "We're all family now," he responded. "Different, maybe, but stronger because of it." As the call ended and the boys ran off to change out of their formal clothes, Michael and Sarah stood quietly in the study, wrapped in each other's arms. "We did it," Sarah whispered, resting her head on his shoulder. Michael kissed the top of her head, his heart full to the brim. "We did, and this is just the start." Looking out the window into the garden, where Harry and Andy were laughing and playing, their joy carried on the breeze, Michael thought about the incredible journey that had brought them here. From being a ruthless businessman, driven by power and wealth, he had transformed into a father, a partner, and a man who now truly understood the real meaning of family and love. The legal battle for custody, which once felt like the hardest thing Michael Grant had ever faced, turned out to be the doorway to a happiness he never thought possible. Through it, he discovered the real meaning of sacrifice, the depth of a parent's love, and the strong ties that define a family. As the day came to a close, with the soft golden light of sunset bathing their home, Michael knew without a doubt that he was exactly where he was meant to be. With his kids and his partner by his side, Michael had found his life's true purpose and his greatest success. The road hadn't been smooth, but every hardship, every tear, and every moment of doubt led to this. A family bonded not by blood, but by choice, by love, and by a steadfast promise to always support one another, no matter what came their way. As he joined his family in the yard, pulling Sarah close and watching Harry show Andy a new soccer trick, Michael made a silent promise to never take these moments for granted and to always cherish the incredible journey that brought them together. The laughter of his kids, Sarah's warm hug, and the peace he felt deep inside were proof of the healing power of love. It had transformed him and created something beautiful from the toughest challenges. This was his legacy, his crowning achievement. A family built on love, trust, and the unbreakable connections of the heart. Family isn't about shared DNA, but about the love we choose to give and the bonds we form through life's struggles. Michael Grant's transformation from a cold businessman to a loving father reminds us that real wealth isn't found in our bank accounts, but in the hearts we touch and the lives we change. Every child deserves a home filled with love, stability, and acceptance. Sometimes the family we need isn't the one we're born into, but the one we build with compassion and commitment. The story of Harry and Andy shows us that even the deepest wounds can heal when surrounded by constant love and support. Life throws unexpected challenges our way, but it's how we face them that defines us. Michael, Sarah, and even Susan demonstrate that true strength lies in putting the needs of our children before our own desires and egos. In our darkest times, when we feel lost or alone, family, whether by birth or by choice, can light the way. It's never too late to open your heart and become the person someone else needs you to be. As you think about your own life, ask yourself, what kind of legacy am I leaving? Am I building walls or bridges? Am I measuring my success by what I own or by the love I give and receive? Remember, the most beautiful families don't always follow the traditional path. They are built on understanding, forgiveness, and the daily decision to love without conditions. In the end, our greatest achievements aren't measured in money or awards, but in the smiles of the children we care for, the strength of the relationships we build, and the depth of love we share. That's what truly defines a life well lived. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey through Michael Grant's story. Your support means everything to us and fuels our passion for storytelling. If this story of love, redemption, and the real meaning of family struck a chord with you, we'd love for you to leave a comment with the number 1. It's a simple gesture, but it helps us know what resonates with you. Curious about what's next for the Grant family? If you're eager for more and want to see a part 3 of this saga, drop a comment with the number 3. Your excitement is what keeps us going. We value your opinions, and if there's anything in the story you disagreed with or would like to talk about further, share your thoughts in the comments. Your feedback is how we grow as storytellers. Lastly, if this narrative touched you and you'd like to support us in creating more heartfelt stories, please consider subscribing to our channel. Each subscription is a vote of confidence that inspires us to dig deeper and tell more stories that matter. Your engagement, whether through likes, comments, or subscriptions, powers our creative process. It's what drives us to keep crafting stories that move hearts and spark meaningful conversations. Thank you for being part of our storytelling community. Together, let's continue exploring the beautiful, complicated fabric of human emotions and experiences.